Okay, this is part 2 on comparison and contrast, when you are asked to make a choice of which is better. Um, Now, clearly, this is probably not simply saying which do you like better, because sometimes that becomes I just do. If you ask me which I like better, apples or oranges, I'm going to probably say oranges simply because they tend to disappoint me less often, because some apples are frankly just meh. If you said, which do I like better, chicken or fish? Chicken, because I hate fish. I don't have a logical reason for it. My mouth just says, oh, you put fish into meat. Why would you do that? So we're probably not talking purely subjective. If I said, which is better, apples or oranges, I can think of probably 4 criteria that you could use to make a decision between them. What's the cost? Um, what is the availability for you as far as what kind of purchasing options you got? How long is it going to remain viable, as in how long can you keep it outside of a fridge and have it still be edible? And nutritional considerations. Okay, so if, for example, I am a sailor at sea, I might say I want oranges more than I want apples because scurvy is more likely to be a factor. The British Navy were called limeys because they had lime, which they mixed with their rum to prevent scurvy, and scurvy is a bad thing. Whereas I don't think there are any particular diseases that are so prevalent that apples are going to keep them away from you. I know they say an apple a day keeps the doctor away. That's only if you have good aim and manage to hit the doctor as he or she is coming to see you. And why would you be doing that? Healthcare workers need to have your support right now. Stop throwing apples at them, people. Okay, so I think they're probably about similar cost. I think they're both going to last at least a week, and it's like I probably can finish them off in that amount of time. Um, I don't believe the whole thing of you have to stockpile vitamin C in your system for your immunity, because you won't retain vitamin C for more than about a day. So I'm probably just simply going to go with oranges are better because they don't bruise as easily. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. I would have a hard time writing very much as far as making a choice between apples and oranges. However, let's go 2 other possibilities where you're asked to make a choice, and that might be an actual practical choice, say between 2 cars, or you're making a choice between what are somewhat subjective, but you're still laying out criteria for them. And that would be who's better as an actor, baseball player, architect, etc. Let me take the first one first because it's easier. Choose one between cars. If the paper is saying which car would you buy, bear in mind that's saying what do you want in a car. If I were back home in the States right now and we're not worrying about COVID-19, I would probably be trying to do theater. That means I want a vehicle with some space. That's one of my first requirements. It has to be a good sized vehicle. I briefly have had smaller cars. They do not work for what I'm trying to do with theater. If I can't haul most of a set around with me and a bunch of costumes and a bunch of props, it's too small. Okay. I don't like driving with a clutch. That's another factor. Now, another little one is if my head touches the ceiling of the car, it's too small. But let's assume that if it's big enough to haul the theater stuff around with me, then it's big enough that my head isn't touching the ceiling. Okay. I don't really care that much about looks. I don't really care that much about if it's super fast. I mean, I want it to be able to hit highway speeds, but I'm not looking at drag racing anyone. I am looking at cost. And to some extent, I'm looking at how easily can I find it in a parking lot. So if my choices were something like a pickup truck and a hearse, I'm probably going to go with a hearse because, one, I probably can get a hearse for fairly cheaply compared to a pickup. People will drive the pickups for a long, long time, whereas the hearse, at some point, the funeral home is probably going to say, let's get a new one. It's probably never had massive miles on it. It's not being driven in all kinds of high-speed chases or anything like that, probably. I'm definitely going to be able to find it in a parking lot. It's definitely going to stand out, and it's going to have lots of room. And it's probably going to be really comfortable because these are luxury vehicles. I know when I looked online at one point, when I was back in the States, hearses were reasonable price. The problem was gas was $4 a gallon then, so it was not practical. But gas is not $4 a gallon now. So based on those criteria, a pickup, and again, these are both hypothetical versions because I don't have the information in front of me right now as to miles and cost and all that. But a pickup versus a hearse, if I can find a hearse, I'm probably going to get the hearse. Now, let's say that it's something like, who's the greatest NBA player of all time? The first thing that you might consider doing is having a little bit of a flow chart of what kind of things do we go, yes, we keep them in the running, no, we eliminate them. For example, did they play in the NBA? No, then they're out of the running. Easy, right? Did they play at least 10 years might be another of your questions. Because basketball is a sport where one person makes a bigger difference in championships, it's not like football. If you're a quarterback these days, you don't play defense, you don't play special teams. You cannot affect anything other than offense. And even that, if you have a terrible line or no receivers or no running game, there is going to be things stacked against you. So using championships as a criteria in football, I think, is foolish. In basketball, I think you can make an argument that it's at least in there. So you might say, have they won at least one championship? In other words, you're not going to consider them in the running for greatest ever if they haven't won at least once. Okay. You might have some other things in your flow chart. You might say, look, I'm not going to try to compare from the 50s to today. I'm just going to say, in the last 20 years, who do I think is the greatest? You'll have to tell me what weight you give to certain statistics. There is a massive mega stat in basketball that basically says points are worth, obviously, points, and then rebounds are worth, I believe it's something like a rebound is worth approximately 1 point per rebound, assists, blocks, et cetera, and you can say, here's who's got the highest total each year. There's also methods that are used, which will sometimes be called things like WAR, wins above replacement. In other words, take a terrible player, but one who can still be in the NBA. How many more wins would you get with player A versus that replacement player? Okay. So if you're making your choice, though, and it's between, say, Christian Laettner and Michael Jordan, and probably most of you don't remember Laettner. He was on the original Dream Team. He played for Duke in the early 90s. As a college player, he might have been better than Jordan. Led Duke to 2 championships and was, I believe, player of the year at least once. As pros, no. Christian Laettner's grandma doesn't think Christian Laettner was better. I think he made 1 All-Star game. He had 0 championships. He was known as being a whiny crybaby when he played for the Timberwolves. He was a whiny crybaby when he played for Duke, too, but Duke had good teams, whereas the Timberwolves did not. Okay? But think of establishing very clearly what your standards are. That's what you're really looking at here. Okay? If you say, one book that I was reading about football, about baseball, said that Joe DiMaggio was one of the greats because there's a song about him. There's a song about him, and that's why he's one of the greats. There's 2 songs at least about Christina Ricci, the actress. Does that mean she's one of the great baseball players of all time? Come up with consistently clear standards and then use them. I would argue that one of the problems that John McCain had when they foisted Sarah Palin on him as a running mate was that he was partly trying to argue that Obama simply did not have that much experience, which I think was an arguable point. But Sarah Palin had had 6 years as a mayor of a medium-sized town in Alaska and 2 years as governor of the 3rd least populated state in the country. In other words, her experience was virtually nothing, and it was not impressive. So now if you're trying to make the argument of vote for who has experience, but you're choosing as your backup, your vice president, somebody with less experience on the national level than Obama, your argument largely goes away. In the upcoming election, one of the things that I was considering during the process was I would rather not have people in their 70s. I think that that's too old to be president in this day and age. I think that you don't have the energy to keep up. Well, what are we going to have? Probably 2 70-year-old people running against each other. Well, 70 plus. So in other words, that argument is going to go out the window as far as age. Then we simply come to who seems maybe like they are physically or mentally more vibrant than the other. And without getting too much into it, it's like, I'm not confident in either of their abilities to form complete sentences on a regular basis. Okay. If you're saying, I can't vote for, The Godfather as the greatest mafia or gangster movie, I'll say, not mafia, gangster movie ever made, because it focuses too much on men. There aren't enough women in it. Unless you're making a gangster movie that is just about a female mafia or mob, that's pretty much a non-unique argument. In other words, well, then none of them are good. Or you're going to have to say, I'm choosing some terrible made-for-TV movie about 3 mobster widows who form their own group, but because it has women focused, that's why I'm choosing it. Well, that's not a particularly great standard, I would say. Okay. I would say sometimes we want to throw out standards like, did it win the Oscar? Did they win this award or that award? Because obviously mistakes get made on that. And it also becomes self-perpetuating, meaning that if you say, well, you have to have won this many awards to get into the Hall of Fame. If you were ignored or underrated during your career, so you didn't win those awards, now you're going to be underrated after your career as far as the Hall of Fame in whatever sport or whatever you're trying to get into. So think of clear standards. Think of standards that apply equally to both. Let me give one other quick example on this. People who argue that William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon did not write the works that are attributed to him will sometimes say, well, look, he spelled his name differently. So did everyone back then. Christopher Marlowe, one of the rivals that he had, spelled his name at least 14 different ways. The way he did not spell it, M-A-R-L-O-W-E, is the way we spell it. He never used that. Even Queen freaking Elizabeth spelled her name in different ways. They were very fluid about spelling. So if you say, well, my standard for arguing against Shakespeare as Shakespeare is because of spelling, then nobody wrote the plays, because you can use that same argument for everyone. Okay? That's not being cynical. That's simply saying that it's a non-unique standard, and so it's not useful. So think clearly about, what are you really looking for? Apply it consistently and logically. And the last thing I'll say on this is, come up with the standards before you make the choice. Don't make the choice and then justify it by kind of piecing the standards together. So that is what you're doing if it is not simply a comparison contrast, but a comparison and contrast and a choice or an evaluation. That concludes this.